Hi, welcome to Self Generated. My name is Steve. I am the owner and creator of Self Generated Podcast. A podcast, I guess, is what it is. It's an exploration of a handful of ideas that fundamentally changed my life. I used to be a real grade A asshole and alcoholic, raging alcoholic, liar, bastard, but successful. I was able to get good jobs and own a home and do all the check marks in life, and was utterly miserable. And it wasn't until a lot of the ideas that I'm going to share with you that I was able to fix that I was able to correct that. And I went through a lot of different things to try to fix myself, to try to stop being who I was, to not being constantly crippled and having to rely on alcohol to deal with my internal struggles. And it was through understanding how I actually worked, what my emotions were, what these things actually were, where my thoughts and actions came from, that it wasn't entirely within my control, but it wasn't entirely out of my control, and that there was underpins and workings that helped me make sense of who I was, and why I was feeling the things and experiencing the things I was experiencing. And it wasn't just things happening to me. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And the core ideas of active inference, embodied cognition, and the extended mind are really ideas that, if you try to Google them or look them up or explore them on your own, they're predominantly in the world of high academia, meaning that they're anything super informative on it is pretty dense, complex, it requires a lot of background knowledge, and it's really mainly around for the sake of more papers. But I take it to that if these things actually do explain how you and I work, how my thoughts and actions come about, what actually is Steve, what is I, what are these things, how do I come about with making decisions, choosing things, noticing things, my attention, what it is to be me in this body, and active inference and embodied cognition and the extended mind help explain all those things. They help explain how our world and us interact, and where my emotions come from and what they actually are, and the sense of me. And they're very counterintuitive to maybe how you believe the world works. They were very counterintuitive to how I believe the world works. But once I take this framework, whether I believe it or not, and I overlay it over my life, when I overlay it over how the world works, it gives a sense of clarity that I never had before. And so that's what I'm trying to transfer over to you. And it's not easy for me because, well, I'm no master of it. I don't believe even in masters. I don't believe in authority. I think a lot of those things are more the ideas of what we believe they are than what they actually are. And that might sound weird, but that's one of the points is a lot of things are oversimplified, and that we try to break down that oversimplification to something a little still manageable, but a little bit more complex, just to give you a sense of clarity and why some of these things don't add up. Because when we oversimplify them and you rough out the edges on the side, you miss the totality of the image. You miss what's really going on sometimes in the details. And that's how we work. When understanding through active inference and body cognition, the extended mind of as a framework of how and why we work, it makes more sense versus us being silly or stupid or missing something, or many of the other narratives that we classically gravitate towards when things don't seem to make sense between human action, how we think, and how the world works. So that's what we try to explore. And we've been exploring it here for a few weeks, a few months now. I'm still trying to find a methodology, a means of recording these ideas down in simple ways to help transfer over the ideas to make sense. And I don't have the time or the ability to do a high level production value, because it's also one not just about being entertained for 8 to 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. That that's part of the problem, is that everything is content. And so we're trying to do this in bite-sized portions so that eventually we can have conversations online, live, or in person, where we're able to explore these ideas more in depth because they are freeing. Understanding who you are, how you work, what we're meant to be, and then not in some fanciful notion, but in a very practical, real, useful way that you can take home and utilize on a day-to-day basis, is exceptionally important, very useful, and is lacking in many, many people's lives right now. And I believe that things are going to get tough in the coming years. That's not to be a doomer, scaremonger, or anything like that. It's just the writing seems to be on the wall that there's going to be greater challenges than we're used to. And that ideas like this, being able to move into spaces that we're not just coping, but we're able to be functional, and we're able to take in what's happening, no matter if we like it or not, process it, and come up with real rational ways of dealing with it versus how we kind of act right now. And not to downplay or minimize or to say people are stupid or certain groups aren't doing the right thing. It's because none of us really understand how we work because we're not necessarily taught in the classical, you're sat down, here's the test, this is what you is, this is how your thoughts work, this is your responsibilities, this is how the system works. Because actually, if you were, you probably would, if you're reasonably intelligent, would go, what the fuck, this doesn't make any sense, because it doesn't. That's one of the sources of absurdity, is that a lot of these things only really work because we all agreed that they do. And that might sound a little weird, but for example, money. When you're looking at all money as it stands right now, it's fiduciary, it's faith-based. There is no gold standard to the dollar. These things are just all because we agree. And that might feel a little weird. We feel that there's greater powers at play there, that there's greater reason than that it's good. That's why we're doing it, right? But in reality, it's because we're mainly all agreeing to do it. And in fact, we haven't really evaluated whether it's good or not for us because that would challenge what we're doing. And because, again, being creatures of certainty through active inference, that would make sense. When things are certain, you like them. The idea behind active inference, in case you missed it, is that it that our experiences, everything that is you, is fundamentally taking in the information, the sensory information as it comes in, and modeling it, interpreting it, figuring out what all of this stuff means. And that your signals, your experiences, when you're experiencing something, I think of it as this is the error signal, the warning that things are not going as predicted. Because when you're not predicting properly, and a creature that is of certainty that is built on being able to predict, when things go south, that's effing dangerous. That's why things can be exhilarating and exciting when they're challenging and only quasi-threatening. So that like magic, like this magical thing is happening in front of you, and all of a sudden this thrill, this scare, because it's counter to how you predict the world to be. A horror movie, a thrill ride, all of these things is counter to how you predict. You don't normally move in that way. And that's actually, after you do those things, after a while, they're not as scary, they're not as thrilling. You have to up the ante because you can predict it. You've experienced it enough. The more you experience something, it can become dull because you can predict it. There's nothing novel or new in it. You can find that's why people get themselves in trouble finding new people thinking they're falling in love because they're not always just looking for love. It's that they're in some way, shape, or form kind of addicted to that initial butterflies of love, that lurking for love, instead of being able to really truly find and endure and experience love for what it is. It's all tied to that predictive nature, but you don't think of it that way. That's not something that's classically taught. We don't think of ourselves as creatures of certainty, and that's why we experience our world. That's why we act in a lot of the ways that we act. But that's what I'm talking about, is understanding these things, and these frameworks is like a series of glasses, like that movie They Live, where you can put them on and you can kind of then see the underpinnings of why some of the things are the way they are. Not just us and our actions, which is very helpful, but also the outside world, because the outside world that we live in is very important. Maybe even more important than some of the other things that we normally think of. And that's when I talk about the extended mind. And some people think of it as a spooky action at a distance. Andy Clark is kind of the front runner of the idea. But the core of it is that the outside world, our technology, each other, our systems, our institutions, are far more core to what makes us us, our thinking, our mindedness, than we take into account for. That things like technology, like your cell phone, can be intrinsic to you. So if I gave you the example of you smashing your phone right now, what kind of experience would you have? Most people would describe an experience of anxiety, being upset. Why they'd be upset at me? Why did I do that? There's a multitude of reasons. We can talk about evolutionary and you owned it and this and that. Your phone is part of your life. It is how you connect with the world. It's an extension of you. And because of that, do you remember phone numbers? Do you remember how to get places? use technology? Do you know how to cook something? Do you remember recipes or do you look them up? Do you know how to get any place?